Ready? Ready? Yes. Good morning. Sorry for being late by 5 minutes. With me today is Professor Shivajyoti Ghosh from Calcutta Medical College. So Dr. Ghosh will take us through the case. Dr. Rajkumar, a third year DND, will be presenting the case. Please start.
Good morning, respected professors, seniors, and colleagues. A 50-year-old female patient, Manju Ghosh, housewife, coming from Nadia district, came with the chief complaint of yellowish discoloration of eyes and urine for past 6 months. History of presenting illness: patient was apparently well before 6 months. Then she developed yellowish discoloration of eyes and urine, which is insidious in onset, progressively increasing, no waxing and waning, no prodromal symptoms before the onset of jaundice, not associated with biliary colic. History of loss of appetite and loss of weight for past 6 months. She lost around 10 kg over 6 months. History of passing clay colored stools for past 4 months. History of itching all over the body for past 2 months. And however, she has history of dull aching pain over the right upper abdomen for past 2 months, and no aggravating, no relieving factors not associated with food intake. No history of fever with chills and rigor, no history of black tarry stool, no history of vomiting, no history of hematemesis, no history of any other swelling, and no history of alteration in bowel habits. She is passing semi-solid stool once a day. No history of any urinary complaint, and no history of any systemic signs of metastasis. Past history: no history of similar illness in the past, no history of any previous surgery or medical illness. Personal history: she is married with 2 children, and health status of both spouse and children are healthy, and she is taking mixed diet and no addiction, and sleep pattern is normal. She belongs to poor socioeconomic status. Menstrual and obstetric history: she attained menarche at 12 years, menopause 8 years back, number of pregnancy 2, abortion 0, live birth 2, and she has 1 male and 1 female, and last childbirth is 30 years back. Family history: both the parents died out of natural cause. Siblings 2 younger sisters, both are healthy. No history of similar illness among the family members. Treatment history: patient visited the private clinic near hometown, and patient referred to SSKM OPD for further management. Allergy history: no history of any known allergies. Summary of the history: a 50-year-old lady presented with a history of yellowish discoloration of eyes and urine for last 6 months, which is insidious in onset, progressive, initially painless, later with dull, aching, continuous pain, and no waxing and waning, no prodromal symptoms, and loss of appetite and weight for past 6 months. Passing of clay colored stools for past 4 months, itching all over the body for past 2 months, and no history of fever or vomiting or black colored stools, no history of alteration of bowel habit, no urinary complaint. Patient has no other systemic symptoms.
Next, carry.
General survey: I had examined the patient in the well light room after taking proper concern, presence of female chaperone, and patient in the decubitus of choice. Patient is conscious, alert, and cooperative. ECOG score of 1. Build is average, poorly nourished, well hydrated, normal faces, gait is normal, no pallor, jaundice is present, no cyanosis, no edema, no clubbing, neck veins are not engorged, no cervical lymphadenopathy, pulse rate is 76 per minute, BP 126 by 84, respiration is 16 per minute, abdominal thoracic, temperature normal, no scratch mark, no pigmentation, no obvious deformity. And coming to the examination of the abdomen: inspection: shape and contour of the abdomen is scaphoid, umbilicus is centrally placed and inverted, skin over the abdomen, no scratch mark, no scar mark, no pigmentation, no engorged veins. All the quadrants are moving normally with respiration, no visible peristalsis or pulsatile movement, and no visible swelling over the abdomen. Hernial site: no swelling or expansile impulse on cough, external genitalium are normal. Superficial palpation: temperature is normal, non-tender, the abdomen is soft and elastic, and palpable lump over right hypochondrium extending to the right lumbar region. On deep palpation: no tenderness over the deep tender point. Gallbladder is palpable over the right hypochondrium extending to the right lumbar region, extending 5 cm from the right costal margin in the mid-clavicular line. It's around 5 cm cross 4 cm, globular shape with smooth surface, well-defined lower medial and lateral margin. An upper margin was not palpable. firm and consistency, moves up and down with respiration, slightly moving side to side, and the swelling is intra-abdominal, and skin over the swelling is normal, not fixed to the skin, no other palpable swelling, hernial size and external genitalia normal. A percussion, dull over the lump, resonant all over the abdomen, rest of the abdomen. Upper border of the liver dullness, fifth intercostal, I say over the right mid-clavicular line. No free fluid, auscultation, peristaltic sounds audible, no added sound, PR to be done. Systemic examination, CBS S1, S2 hurt, no murmur, RS, normal vesicular blood sound, no added sound, CNS, no focal neurological deficit, spine and cranium normal. Summary of the case: a 50-year-old lady presented with a history of yellowish discoloration of eyes and urine for last 6 months, which is insidious in onset, progressive, initially painless, and later with dull aching, continuous pain. No waxing and waning, no prodromal symptoms, and significant loss of appetite and significant loss of weight for past 6 months. Passing of clay color stools for past 4 months, itching all over the body for past 2 months. No history of fever or vomiting of black color stools, no history of alteration of bowel habit, no urinary complaint, patient has no other systemic symptoms. On general survey, nutrition is poor, patient is deeply jaundiced, no cervical lymphadenopathy. On examination, gallbladder is palpable 5 cm below the costal margin, non-tender, firm in consistency, moves up and down with respiration, medial lower lateral margin palpable, upper border not palpable. Liver and spleen not palpable, no other mass is palpable, no free fluid, normal bubble sounds are found. I like to give a differential diagnosis. My first diagnosis DD would be carcinoma of the gallbladder with obstructive jaundice due to metastasis in the porta hepatis or invasion to the bile duct. Second would be obstructive jaundice due to cholangioCA involving the bile duct.
Okay, come to the diagnosis later on. Its
So
approach
what
is
is
not.
the provisional diagnosis? First, you will give provisional diagnosis,
Yeah.
then we come to the differential.
What is
diagnosis.
different diagnosis at the beginning?
So what will be the provisional diagnosis?
Carcinoma of the gallbladder with obstructive jaundice due to metastasis in the porta hepatis or invasion to the bile duct.
Can you justify? This is a patient of obstructive jaundice with palpable gallbladder, no prodromal symptoms, no pain, and patient has other symptoms suggestive of some underlying malignant disease. So why do you first jump into carcinoma gallbladder? Is it common to have carcinoma gallbladder patient presenting with obstructive jaundice?
No.
Palpable gallbladder, which is smooth, you said, is not irregular gallbladder. Because that is the one important situation that you find the gallbladder is irregular, surface irregular. In that case, it's primarily the gallbladder. It's a distended gallbladder. A tense gallbladder may feel firm. So why don't you go to the more common diagnosis of either a carcinoma head pancreas or a perineal carcinoma? That should be a more reasonable diagnosis in this patient. Rather than saying this will come in differential diagnosis, I agree, but this is not the primary diagnosis come to in a patient like this. Come to the examination first. You see, in a postgraduate level, it is better to say gallbladder lump is palpable. And once you say gallbladder lump is palpable, then it is implied that it will have a medial border, lateral border. Once you start the statement saying that gallbladder is palpable, in that case, you define the surface, you define the consistency and the mobility. Because other points are corroborating with the gallbladder lump, that's why it's inferring that is a gallbladder lump. Or a different way of description is a lump is palpable in the right upon division, it has got a medial border, it has got a lateral border, lower border, upper border not palpable, and likely to be a gallbladder mass. But if once you start the statement that the gallbladder is palpable, you describe the other characters of the lump. Okay, most of the points are the point which points towards a gallbladder mass. Okay, otherwise your history and examination is good. That should be the approach.
Okay, that's very good. Actually, during examination in postgraduate level, most of the examiners like to hear the summary of the case. That you have written very nicely. And next, your diagnosis is obstructive jaundice due to, you have said, carcinoma of the gallbladder. Okay, fine. So it has two parts, right? It has two parts.
Yes.
So this case has diagnosis has two parts. One is obstructive jaundice.
Yes.
Second is due to.
First diagnosis is this. This is a case of obstructive jaundice, probably due to next.
Right. So the very standard and common question is, why do you say it's a case of obstructive jaundice? And second part, why do case say it's due to, as you said, is a due to gallbladder carcinoma?
Why obstructive jaundice?
From clinical point of view, and from first you defend your diagnosis from clinical point of view.
From history, patient has a yellowish discoloration of eyes of urine, and history of clay color stool, high color urine, and itching all over the body. Point towards this one, and no prodromal symptoms present.
Stick to more important part. These are enough. Patient having a progressive jaundice, we started without any prodromal symptoms, and this patient is having onset of clay color stool and itching. These are the points. You need not bring out a lot of points in for diagnosis of obstructive jaundice and a palpable gallbladder. Okay, you need no medical jaundice. You find the gallbladder is palpable.
Right. So obstructive jaundice has mainly 3 points, right? Clinically, one is itching, number 2 clay color stool, and 3 maybe features of cholangitis. So all 3 may not be present. So either 1 or 2, along with jaundice, is present. So we can clinically say this is a case of obstructive jaundice. Now, what are the points in favor of a diagnosis that it is due to carcinoma of the gallbladder?
Now you justify. You want first diagnosis of carcinoma of gallbladder. So what are the usual presentation of a patient who is having a carcinoma of gallbladder and then presenting with jaundice?
Usually, CAGB is carcinoma gallbladder is rapidly progressive. Usually,
No, it's not really rapidly progressive means it's true. But what is the background? In a patient of carcinoma gallbladder, what is the most common association?
cholecystitis associated pain.
So if the patient has got long-standing history of cholecystitis and then there is a recent change in pain, and then the patient has other features of obstructive jaundice, then you suspect patient has loss of appetite. That means on the background of history of cholecystitis, patient has recent change in symptomatology. So there is nothing like that in this patient. She has no biliary colic, you said. She has recent onset loss of weight and appetite, almost the same time as the jaundice. So we'll take the DD, but don't stick to the diagnosis of carcinoma gallbladder. Rather, you go more in favor of carcinoma head pancreas or a periampillary carcinoma. What is the difference between saying a diagnosis of carcinoma head pancreas or a periampillary carcinoma?
Periampillary is like around 2 centimeter around the ampulla.
Yes.
arises
And the tumor may arise from where?
from 4 point from first the ampulla.
Ampulla
And the second one is duodenum.
Which part of duodenum?
Second part of the duodenum.
That means within 2 centimeter of the ampulla. Periampullary duodenal carcinoma. Next,
Next from the distal
within 2 ampulla. And this also includes a head carcinoma.
which arises into
Head carcinoma within 2 ampulla. So periampullary carcinoma are the group of tumors which are within the 2 centimeter of the ampulla. And when you say carcinoma head pancreas,
which is away, arise from the head of the pancreas,
Yes.
which is away from
which
2
are
centimeters.
yes, and usually these are bulky tumors. So
Okay.
stick to that.
Can you clinically say, suppose your case is periampillary carcinoma, or maybe carcinoma of the pancreas? Can you clinically defend your diagnosis of either periampillary carcinoma or carcinoma of the pancreas? I mean, is there any features
Some other features.
which can support your diagnosis of either periampillary or carcinoma?
CA head of pancreas, CA age, first is age, then more common in males. And periampullary carcinoma, from clinically, the patient will have waxing and waning of jaundice and associated with silvery stools. And
And which percentage of cases these classical symptoms are present? It's around 30%, right?
Yes. You are given a array of 4 tumors. A carcinoma head pancreas will not fluctuate. Which will fluctuate? A ampullary tumor, a duodenal tumor, or a distal cholangiosia, which is of papillary type. A sclerosing type of cholangiosia will not fluctuate. So even periampullary, all does not fluctuate. It is not synonymous that all periampullary tumor will fluctuate jaundice. So only these varieties may fluctuate. And there are some other features. Dr. Ghosh is asking, when you say the first diagnosis I see is carcinoma head of the pancreas, because patient has some other symptoms which point more towards C head pancreas rather than a periampillary.
C head mass is
Mass the head pancreas is not palpable very commonly. What do you get?
Usually this CA head pancreas, the pain first,
Yes.
followed by jaundice. And associated with the pain, there may be some other general symptoms of malignancy, like loss of appetite or appetite. So these will precede the onset of jaundice, right? Because it is away from the terminal end of the CVD, right? So as the tumor grows, there is stretching of the pancreatic capsule. So the patient will feel pain first.
That is pancreatic pain. Mind it.
Right.
It's not biliary colic. Pain of pancreatic origin.
Yes.
There may be dull ache in the epigastrium, which may radiate to the back. Patient is more comfortable sitting posture. So it's a pain of pancreatic origin.
Right.
And
when it grows more, then it compresses the lower end of common bile duct, then jaundice appears. Whereas in periampullary, it is on the outflow or tract of the common bile duct. So there will be jaundice first, followed by pain. It may not present in all the cases, but if these things are there, so you can define your clinical diagnosis.
gastric outlet obstruction is common in which variety? Patient may have sensation. You have not mentioned that. Should also mention. Patient may not have outright vomiting. Patient may have sensation of fullness after meals, discomfort after meals, suggestive of outlet obstruction. In which type of tumor you find patient has more incidence of this gastric fullness?
even CH gallbladder.
No, no,
one of the
No, I'm talking of this periampillary versus C8 pancreas. C8 pancreas may have more incidence of outlet obstruction. So, because once you are coming to a diagnosis, why C8 first, why periampillary second, you have to justify that. So, your first diagnosis should be more reasonable. You cannot have any point in favor of CA gallbladder. And it's very difficult to get answer cholangiocarcinoma. Why is a cholangiocarcinoma? Which cholangiocarcinoma? Which part of the bile duct in this patient?
maybe from the middle, not from the distal.
Not distal. Well,
So for
gallbladder. No, keep in mind you confine to this patient. You already described the patient as a palpable gallbladder. So it cannot be a clustering tumor. It cannot be a cholangiocarcinoma arising from the confluence because gallbladder is palpable. So you have to give a diagnosis keeping in mind what is there in this patient. This patient has obstructive jaundice and a palpable gallbladder. So give a reasonable diagnosis based on this. Okay, so see your diagnosis you should revise. And then maybe other rarer diagnoses like obstructive jaundice with some evidence of malignancy, other diagnosis.
more of the malignant person.
This is the patient you presented. Why should you think of benign cause initially? Think of malignant cause and then rarely, some patient of benign disease may sometimes behave like it's like a malignant disease. That also should come here. Give some more malignant diseases which can present in similar fashion.
Just 1 minute. Here, one thing you should remember that there are certain diagnoses which are histopathological diagnosis and certain diagnoses which are clinical diagnosis. So first, we try to arrive at the clinical diagnosis and then finally we want to confirm it by histopathological examination. Cholangiocarcinoma, particularly if you want to include the lower end of cholangiocarcinoma, that is a more or less a histopathological diagnosis rather than a clinical diagnosis, right? Sometimes higher cholangiocarcinoma, you can say, is a clinical diagnosis, right? So you have to be specific. And when we're talking about the differential diagnosis, provisional diagnosis, we cannot include a histological diagnosis. Sometimes some of the histological features, tumors, are so obvious, there you can say, like if you want to say pseudopapillary tumor of the pancreas, right? Certain features are so obvious, right? Young female patient, large pancreatic mass on the head or tail region, right? So these are so obvious, mobile. Other than this, the mass itself, other symptoms are less. They're so obvious. Sometimes we can clinically say it's could be a case of pseudopapillary tumor. But otherwise, by and large, we should give the clinical diagnosis rather than histopathological diagnosis. Right? You answer the question.
Other few more diagnoses which can come for discussion.
Any other GA malignancies involving the body?
Like GA is a huge malignancy. Small gut malignancy will not cause presentation like this.
Gastric CA
Yes.
involving porta hepatic.
Yes.
Any other tumor nearby involving the bile duct causing obstructive jaundice.
Okay.
And benign causes, most of many benign causes might be some other inflammatory lesions.
Always you have to bring always chronic pancreatitis. Chronic pancreatitis is a disease which can mimic everything. You see, this patient may have obstructive jaundice with palpable gallbladder. This patient may have pain which is of chronic pancreatitis cannot be always differentiated from malignant pain. So chronic pancreatitis should come as during this patient.
Regarding gallbladder carcinoma, I think you must have seen a lot of cases of gallbladder carcinoma here, right? In West Bengal, it's more or less an endemic zone for gallbladder carcinoma. So, what are the presentations of gallbladder carcinoma you have seen preoperatively?
How do you come to diagnosis? Yes.
That is very important because they have written it as a first diagnosis.
Preoperatively, it presents as a case of acute cholecystitis, or maybe a chronic biliary tract disease.
Some patient of carcinoma gallbladder may present agreed. You evaluate if high patient pregnancy. Other presentation?
As a chronic biliary tract disease, like biliary pain.
It can be incidental gallbladder cancer. What is that? When you say this patient has got incidental gallbladder cancer,
After doing for a benign cause like
that means you did not have suspicion of malignancy. Patient came to you with symptoms of chronic cholecystitis like symptoms. You done a surgery. You did not suspect anything. Pathology is given a diagnosis. Fine. That is one. Other presentation?
Presenting as a GB mass, gallbladder mass, and
Presenting
as an
more
advanced
advanced.
disease.
Before that, you see, one is incidental. You did not suspect at all. Came out this. Next, patient has symptoms of gallstone disease with recent change in symptomatology. You have a classic pattern of patient in gallstone disease. A biliary colic, severe pain, nausea in bed, relieved, fine. Again biliary colic. But this biliary colic now changing to a pain which is dull, constant, continuous, getting referred to some other sites. Patient has loss of appetite, loss of weight, appearance of jaundice. That means there is change in symptomatology. And next comes your mass. What mass?
What are the characteristics of the mass? It will be hard, right? Your palpable gallbladder is hard, irregular, right?
Hard,
So
irregular.
with or without jaundice. Patient presents early, particularly the mass is at the fundus region. So there may not be jaundice of presentation. But if the mass is around the infundibula or neck of the gallbladder and involving the common hepatic duct, the patient will be presenting with the jaundice. Or patient may present with the advanced features of gallbladder carcinoma like ascites, Jacob's gland, all these things. So this is one group. Another group of patients, I say, you may present incidentally, right? In the post-operative setting, you see the histopathological report, patient may present with gallbladder carcinoma. And another group of patients that may present in the post-operative period, say after cholecystectomy, after 1 month patient, there is appearance of jaundice, right? A post-operative jaundice. Patient was well in between the operation and the appearance of jaundice in elderly patient. So there also you should think about the possibility of gallbladder carcinoma, right? If you look at the biopsy report, sometimes patients don't ignore about the biopsy report, but when you look at the biopsy report, you see there is jaundice. Because of there is involvement by the process, there is involvement of the lymph node, right? And jaundice appears. So these are the classical presentation of gallbladder carcinoma as we see in our day-to-day practice, right? So your patient does not fit any of these characteristics. So the more prudent diagnosis would be carcinoma of the, either you can say head of the pancreas or periampulate carcinoma. Periampulate carcinoma is because more common, you can say it could be a case of periampulate carcinoma.
You do not have fluctuation of jaundice. And most important is once you describe the lump description per se exclude a gallbladder cancer. If it's a smooth gallbladder, it's a firm, it's still cystic to firm gallbladder, moving up in a respiration. So it is likely to be a tensely distended gallbladder because of a distal obstruction. That is the main thing. Your description will, or the patient, what is there in front of you is the answer. Okay. Now you can go
By
to-
then, what is Courvoisier's law?
In a case of surgical jaundice, if the gallbladder is palpable, it is not due to benign etiology because the gallbladder is contracted due to chronic cholecystitis.
Actually, you tell what the Courvoisier was stating. There is a clear description of Courvoisier. Why do you change few words? If in a obstetric jaundice patient, if gallbladder is palpable, it is unlikely to be due to cholelithiasis because in that case, gallbladder will be fibrilled by bilious attacks of cholecystitis. That's what the Courvoisier states. It is not saying that it is because of carcinoma head of the pancreas. So that is what Courvoisier should say, like clear.
So law is law, right? Like Newton's law, you have to remember all the words. Okay. Now next, so what is your plan with this patient?
How you proceed?
I'll do the investigation.
Which diagnosis are sticking now? Your diagnosis or at the end of examiner's suggestion, you like to revise your diagnosis? Yes, be flexible. Don't be rigid. No, sir, I think we still carcinoma gallbladder. There will be no rigidity like that.
Yes,
So-
if you are very, well conversed with carcinoma gallbladder, you can stick to this diagnosis, right? Sometimes carcinoma gallbladder may present features like this,
Yes.
provided the growth is at the neck,
Neck.
right? So it is obstructing the gallbladder and gallbladder is distended. But one thing against is the 6 months history. Usually
Yes, and no
gallbladder
history of previous cholecystitis. We are not
gallbladder
against.
carcinoma 6 months history is very unlikely, right? Because they are one of the worst malignancy of the hepatobiliary region. Okay.
So revise diagnosis. How will you proceed?
I'll do certain investigation to confirm my diagnosis and for staging the disease and for further.
Divide. Chintamani style. I'll do some investigation to confirm my diagnosis and support the diagnosis. Do some investigation to stage the disease and do investigation to assess patient fitness for anesthesia surgery. So divide the investigation into these groups and it is easy to describe now. You say to confirm the diagnosis. What are the investigation you do to confirm the diagnosis?
First, I'll do a USG whole of
Or
first
not
LFT.
development test? Yes.
LFT.
You said obstetric jaundice. First
So
investigation is
biochemical
LFT.
confirmation, that is very important.
What in LFT suggests is obstetric jaundice?
Direct bilirubin is right,
Yes.
and alkaline phosphatase and gamma glucose transcriptase increase.
Can liver enzyme be elevated in patient with obstetric jaundice?
Yes, it can
Yes. What does it indicate?
indicate that the
ALT/ST
hepatic
is or yes. Patient with obstetric jaundice, long-term obstetric jaundice may have associated hepatic dysfunction. So if you have ALT/ST being elevated, but you will find always that in infective hepatitis, ALT/ST has gone to the tune of 5,000, 6,000. Patient obstetric jaundice will not have 5,000 IU of ALT/ST. There may be some elevation which can suggest some hepatocellular dysfunction. Okay.
What do you expect in this patient about the level of AGOT?
it will be increased slightly.
6 months long history, isn't that? So some form of
There may be some increase, you can say like that. There may be some increase of ALT/ST in this patient also.
And USG whole of hepatobiliary system. Then in this, I find where the growth is from, and its relation to the CBD and pancreas, and any associated liver mets, lymph nodes.
Tell me some findings in USG which will make you feel that this patient does not merit further investigations. Tell some points in USG which may suggest that this patient does not merit further investigation for his management. Like,
The patient having ascites,
yes,
then lymph node enlargement, and
one or two lymph nodes. 1 or 2 lymph nodes. Patient has gross lymphadenopathy. Okay, gross, large lymph nodes, aortic nodes, other paraortic nodes. Then
And
Which
invasion
lymph
to
node is
the
most important? Involvement of which group of lymph node is important, so that you can say it is rather inoperable.
parioid,
Not
paracaval
inoperable, I would, yes.
and
Lymph
celiac.
node station 16, right? The involvement of this group of lymph node, that means already a systemic disease. Even if it is locally resectable, so only the palliative treatment is required.
I'm not talking of liver. Diffuse hepatic metastasis. So if you have, you can find that a omental mass. So if you have a very advanced disease, which will suggest that this is a patient who is only for palliative treatment. Okay, so ultrasound. What is double duct sign?
Both the common bile duct and the pancreatic duct is dilated.
So what is the implication of this?
There is obstruction at the ampulla level.
Good. Next.
LFT done, ultrasound done. Next.
I like to do a MRCP for this patient. To
MRCP. Don't jump to something which is not the
How the MRCP
usual
will help
protocol.
you?
It will delineate the biliary anatomy. And
You have given a diagnosis of what? You have given a diagnosis of perianth carcinoma. So how an MRCP is going to change your management or give a different diagnosis? You don't diagnose a polyglycemia in this patient. So don't jump to something which is not the usual algorithm of this management.
I have to do a triphasic CEC with
Yes,
pancreatic
you should
protocol.
answer should be you've done ultrasonography. So based on ultrasonography finding, I will plan my next investigation. If ultrasound corroborates my clinical diagnosis, I will pass on to a what CT scan?
Triphasic CT scan with pancreatic protocol.
Yes.
By and large, benign obstetric jaundice, we prefer MRCP. Malignant obstetric jaundice, we prefer triphasic MDCT. Right? Next. What is the advantage of triphasic MDCT? What are the things that you see in triphasic MDCT?
It will give more 1 to 4 mm axial cuts, so smaller lesions can be seen, and it can through 3 phases it will see, and plus non-contrast phase.
What are the 3 phases? Non-contrast, and then next
Arterial phase,
arterial phase,
then pancreatic
parenchymal phase, and
portal venous
portal
phase.
phase. Good. So these phases are important for coming to diagnose in certain situations. What do you specifically see in arterial phase? Which tumors are better seen in arterial phase of
Neuroendocrine tumors can be better seen with
more
higher
muscular
osteoblast.
tumors? Then
And during pancreatic phase, we can see the low vascular, like pancreatic parenchymal tumors
Yes.
can be better.
100%, which are hypovascular, you can see as a hypodense mass in comparison to the pancreatic parenchymal density. And what about the venous phase? How the venous phase is important?
Even few endocrine tumors can be seen.
Yes. What else? Venous phase is important more for resectability,
Vascular anatomy, right?
muscular involvement. Okay, you have a good quality of CT scan done. Ultrasound, CT scan done.
So in the CT scan, what are things we assess? Number one, the diagnosis itself, one itself. Number two, lymph node status. Number three, the vascular anatomies, right? And anomalies, vascular involvements, right? And anomalies, vascular, which is very common in the hepatobiliary region. What is the commonest anomaly in the hepatobiliary region? Vascular anomaly.
Which you should keep in mind while doing the surgery, sir. While doing surgery, you need to keep in mind that
Yes, it is the replaced right hepatic artery, right? The incidence is around 20%. That means 1 in every 5 cases.
Where does it arise?
Right.
Where from it arises?
Sir,
Leg gastrula.
common, right, hepatic common.
Now
Replaced.
replaced or aberrant or accessory.
While doing
Gastro-
surgery, yes,
Gastro-
gastrointestinal artery. In that case, you need to clamp the gastrointestinal artery to assess whether there is discoloration or not. Because that you can demonstrate now with good quality typhus CT scan. There will be an angiographic picture also.
And also liver metastasis and appendicitis. So these are the features that we assess in MDCT, right?
So don't utter MRCP if you are having a diagnosis of periapical carcinoma or carcinoma appendix. What about FDG PET?
Along with CT scan, it can be done.
What can be done? It's not. It's trying to understand. How many PET CT scan you have seen in a patient who are being admitted for surgical treatment? 0. Why do you say can be done? And even the description says is not the standard of care for primary diagnosis. It can be done. If you do, it will show the increased uptake, but that is not the recommended primary staging investigation for a periapical tumor. It's a practical case. You stick to what is the usual mode of management. Which metastasis cannot be picked up by even a good quality triphasic CT scan?
Less than 1 centimeter.
1 centimeter. 5 millimeter can be easily picked up. Maybe 7 millimeter lesion line picked up by triphasic CT scan. It will. Less than 5 millimeter. Lesion of 2 millimeter, 3 millimeter often can be picked up. A small peritoneal seedlings can be picked up. So here are the situations. So after this, what will we be doing? We have done ultrasound CT, triphasic CT. What next?
Then I do investigation to stage the disease.
Like
And already done.
CCT is also a diagnostic and staging. CCT is a staging investigation also. The routinely the CCT chest follow-up, unless patient is symptomatic, there is no it's not a routine staging investigation. But you should keep in mind saying a tumor marker, CA19-9, because that has got an implication. A very high CA19-9 level indicates what? You have done CA19-9, you should say in carcinoma pancreas, CA19-9 should be part of your primary workup. Very high level, that is 150 CA19-9. Does it have any implication?
Maybe advanced.
Yes. Usually more than 100 CA19-9 usually indicates advanced disease, and that is an indication for doing a staging laparoscopy. Because you said some small metastatic deposit can be picked up by CT scan. So CA19-9 should be part of your initial workup. Then
suppose you have done all this investigation up to CCT, right? MDCT, and your index patient bilirubin level is say 20 and direct is 15, indirect 5. Okay, and on MDCT, you see there is a certain cutoff at the just above the proximal to the level of ampula, right? You don't see any kind of mass or contrast enhancement in that region.
any other investigation which can help?
Endoscopic ultrasound.
Don't say routinely, but if the situation is placed like that, we don't do routine EUS. But even at the end of CT scan, you cannot come to a diagnosis. In that case, there is a role for doing EUS. How EUS help? What is the advantage of getting EUS?
Very smaller.
One is it is what? No radiation. No radiation. You can go very close to the ampullary region.
And we can visualize both the pancreatic and the CT.
Yes.
And then we can take some washings, scrapping, brush biopsy,
Not brush. Brush biopsy can take years ago. With US, you can take needle biopsy.
and lymph nodes. And
Okay, so that is important, right? We can also give you some diagnosis, may give you the diagnosis, and also you can take sample by FNAC, right? Usually FNAC is not recommended in hepatobiliary malignancy, but since you are doing US, so it can be done. Why?
for
In transabdominal FNAC is not recommended, but US FNAC it can be done.
like for seedling and treatment.
So even if there the needle track seedling, the tract will be within the specimen, which will be excised within the excised specimen, right? Okay, so suppose bilirubin is 20, right? So what will be your next approach to this patient?
And you decompress the reduce the bilirubin.
Preoperative bilirubin drainage. Preoperative drainage.
Is it based only on bilirubin level or you consider something more also? Sarah has given us image of bilirubin is 20. So is it the absolute value of bilirubin is important for decompression or there are some other points you should take into account?
Hydration.
Hydration you can correct.
So the standard recommendation for preoperative biliary drainage, what are the standard, which patients or indications for preoperative biliary drainage?
Increased bilirubin is one parameter, yes, agreed. But along with that, should be some other pointers that yes, this patient will benefit with stenting. What is the problem of pre-op stenting? Just say it. Disadvantage.
During surgery, it may cause infection. Infection rate is increased.
It can cause pericholectomy. Surgery may be a little difficult. So during the
inoperable cases, we can do stenting.
You are not talking inoperable case. We are talking operable case. One scenario is bilirubin high. I am saying is only bilirubin the marker to go for stenting, or you take into account some other factors.
Associated cholangitis is there.
Yes.
So number one is
hepatocellular dysfunction is there. Also, hepatic dysfunction is so high.
Hepatic dysfunction means what?
Like
yes. So if the bleeding profile, the coagulation profile is prolonged, right? First is general, if the patient has poor general condition like albumin low.
Okay.
Next is if the coagulation profile is deranged or prolonged. Number 3, cholangitis, right? And if there is a long waiting period.
Yes.
In some of the hospitals like SSKM, they have a long waiting period, right? So in the probably these are the situations where we can go for.
So always keep in mind, it's not the absolute value of bilirubin which is deciding the pre-op decompression. So if the patient fulfills other criteria, that patient is the case of borderline resectable pancreatic cancer. That means you are not going for upfront surgery. In that case, you may need to give the patient a benefit of a decompression followed by neoadjuvant and then plan for surgery. Okay, fine. So next is baseline workup. Which will include
CBC, then chest X-ray, ECG.
So how do you prepare a case of obstetric jaundice of a patient like this? For surgery.
You have decided that patient is operable and you are going to prepare this patient for surgery. What is the usual preparation? State with salient points.
After clinical assessment and investigation, proper history taken, we have to first is correct the malnutrition and associated hypoprotein level, hypoalbumin.
How will you correct? He is admitted for surgery and now you find he is malnourished.
Encourage oral nutrition, enteral nutrition, and if not, in the case of chronic, we can give FFP, albumin.
Albumin. How albumin helps? Giving albumin is a waste. Giving albumin is a waste. Giving only albumin is not going to improve with nutrition. It's cost you 6,000 rupees now. It's not. You said you will build up the nutrition. So the best route for building this is oral. But if you feel he is admitted, he is for surgery for maybe in 3-4 days, you can give the patient total parenteral nutrition. That means you supplement. It's not a sold TPN, is oral plus you supplement with TPN. It's not, the albumin is no answer. So build up nutrition by both oral and if required by
Hepatic albumin, that is more important for nutritional purpose, right? This direct given albumin that only increases the colloidal osmotic pressure, right? It does not has anything to do with the nutrition. Okay, so in acute stage where like in burns, okay, shock, where you need to do the raise the colloidal osmotic pressure, there this albumin may be helpful, right? Next.
To prevent renal dysfunction, renal failure in patients of obstetric.
The point is that the answering should be very clear. First answer he made is good. He is malnourished, build up nutrition. Next is patient may be anemic. So take each of the point and address the issue. If he is anemic, how are you going to correct him?
We can give back PRBC.
Yes. He is admitted for surgery. He cannot be on oral iron or injectable iron. His anemia should be corrected by giving PRBC transfusion. Next.
Infection.
These are the patients who are prone to have infection. They are more likely to be dehydrated. Taking less food may have resulted vomiting, loss of appetite. So how to correct dehydration?
By IV fluids.
If he is taking orally,
Encourage
if
more.
he is not vomiting, why jump to IV fluid? If he is not vomiting, you increase the oral fluid. How do you know a patient is adequately hydrated?
By looking in the tongue.
First, he will not be thirsty.
Thirsty.
If you are thirsty, his thirst would have gone. Next, assess the general signs of hydration status. Chalo, we are not going to that. Okay. And objective assessment of hydration is, these are all subjective. Urine output. Good. Next.
And glycogen reserve should be improved by giving dextrose. Then,
So these are the patients who are usually depleted of liver glycogen. So you can build up the liver glycogen giving more of carbohydrate. Next. They are prone to have increased incidence of infection. Increase of infection. They have increase of infection.
commonly gram-negative
Yes.
infection. So we covered with antibiotics like cefuroxime and third generation.
So give the patient antibiotic. What is the next more important coagulation disorder? What disorder is common?
Vitamin K dependent factors are reduced. Then so that we give injection vitamin K for 5 days, 1 ampule IM. And we have to constantly monitor the PTINR. And it should be within 80% of the normal value, around 14 to 16 seconds.
5 days vitamin K given. You are repeating the PAPINR. There is not much improvement. What is the implication?
It means the hepatic dysfunction is there. I give FFP for the patient.
So that indicates that you are given vitamin K, but the vitamin K should be placed in the liver to produce this coagulation factor. So there might be some liver dysfunction which is not coping up with this coagulation disorder. So in that case, treatment would be
Plasma.
what about the problem of hepatorenal failure in the posterior period? How will you prevent hepatorenal failure in the posterior period? Here the patient who are supposed to may develop hepatorenal syndrome in the posterior period. How are you going to address that?
That's multifactorial, the causes of hepatorenal syndrome. So first is hydration status. Adequate hydration should be given.
Yes.
And you also due to sepsis, there
Yes.
may be proper IV antibiotics should be given. And bile
No, that theory is gone. deposition of bile salts, giving the patient diuretic, that is not followed now. You do not give the patient diuretic, that is not required. These are the two important factors. The attention to this will prevent development of post-op Gardner syndrome.
Okay, so you have done the operation, whatever. What are the various types of operation that can be done for periampulary carcinoma? Basically, it is pancreaticodelectomy. What are the variants of pancreaticodelectomy?
First Whipple's,
Classical Whipple's.
classical Whipple's, then extended Whipple's, then pylorus preserving pancreaticoduodenectomy.
Okay. So you have done one operation, pancreaticodelectomy. Now, tell me something about the monitoring of this patient in the post-operative period.
How you manage the patient in the post-op?
Patient should be managed in an intensive care unit, and checking vitals should be done. And after that, patient should be rice tube should be given, and catheterize the patient. Urine monitoring should be done. And
Don't be haphazard. This is a question of post-op management. The first answer is good. Patient should be in ITU. And then what are the important things you will see in the post-op period?
Day one, post-operative day one, you are in the round. Now, what are the things you will check?
check the vitals and abdomen, any collection in the drain. After that, I'll take blood glucose 4 times daily.
You want to see the Ryle's tube, the fluid that is coming out to Ryle's tube, the color, right? That is very important. Also the drain. Okay. So tell me two important complications in the post-operative period, immediate post-operative period.
Hemorrhage and
Bleeding back. So can you classify the bleeding of pancreaticodelectomy? It could be extraluminal, it could be luminal, right? There are so many anastomosis. You can place any from this anastomosis, that is luminal bleeding, or it can be bleeding or oozing from the rectovagal margin. So many dissections, right, has been done. So if it is extraluminal, so there will be blood in the drain, in the abdominal drain. If it is intraluminal, there will be blood in the Ryle's tube, right? So that way you can differentiate. And what are another important complications?
anastomotic break. Drain, we can see the
Only pancreatic fistula, post-operative pancreatic fistula, right? So for that, in the third post-operative day, do you like to assess anything for that?
drain amylase like
Right.
What is the standard definition for post-operative pancreatic fistula?
rise in amylase on the more than third
Again, it's a statement by a group, which is now taken as standard definition for post-operative pancreatic fistula. What is the definition? Definition is any measurable drain output on third post-op day with drain amylase being 3 times the serum amylase. That is a clear definition. There are a lot of other definitions, but these are standard definition ISDPG. International pancreatic group, they are defined like this. So you have to confirm that the drain fluid, and this is the parameter to say pancreatic fistula.
So how do you like to follow up this patient? Suppose everything is done well, patient has gone home on the say 12 post-operative day, you have discharged the patient, nice home, stitch him home, right? So what will be your follow-up?
with the CA19 follow the patient for any chance of recurrence.
So you will not think of any adjuvant treatment. You are discharging the patient 12 post-op day. When do you review the patient?
Would you like to look at the biopsy report and what will make you very happy? Happy for the
The tumor-free margin, tumor-free margin and
You have
Which
removed the
margin?
specimen and
which margin? Tumor-free margin, which margin is most important? Retroperitoneal margin. Right.
Lymph nodes.
Notes if it's negative, then
That is good.
and
If there is no lymph node spread, that is a good.
Usually there are few lymph nodes, but if it comes up to be a reactive hypoplasia, right, and there is no tumor emboli in the lymph nodes, right, and any other feature which is also very, very important, that is lymphovascular infiltration, right. So if these things are not there, so you will be very happy, right. So even if say there is tumor margin, the reactive hypoplasia lymph nodes, but if there is lymphovascular invasion, right. So in that patient needs to have adjuvant chemotherapy.
So don't discharge the patient saying CA 199. You are discharging patient 12 post-op days, so this patient should be called in for review and reassess the patient with your histopathology report. And most of these patients require adjuvant therapy. What adjuvant therapy?
5-fluorouracil, gemcitabine.
Usually gemcitabine based chemotherapy. Okay. Yes, a little definition of what do you mean by borderline resectable pancreatic cancer?
It is initially not resectable, but
Define when. I ask you, how do you define borderline resectable pancreatic cancer?
within 4 unilateral or bilateral.
What?
Unilateral or bilateral.
A straightaway imaging based resectable cancer. That means you have done a CT scan. Portal vein is free. Supramesenteric artery is free. Celiac trunk, GDA, hepatic artery, all free. So based on this extension, a new group of tumor has come called the borderline resectable pancreatic cancer. Initially, earlier it was non-resectable. Now with adjuvant, neoadjuvant chemotherapy. So when you say it's borderline resectable, or you say non-resectable, straightaway.
Okay, in relation to borderline resectable pancreatic adenocarcinoma, the three radiological key features are very commonly used. One is impeachment, and then abutment, and another is encasement. So do you know what are these things? What is impeachment? What is abutment? What is encasement?
Impeachment of the superior mesenteric vein and unilateral then encasement of the hepatic artery. And
No, it is in terms of degree of involvement, right? If the tumor is involved less than 180 degree, then it is called abutment. Right? It is more than 180 degree, it is called encasement. And impeachment is just pushing the vessels, not directly involved in infiltrating. Right? So based on these things, the criteria for borderline resectable pancreatic cancer. So mainly there is vascular involvement.
Please, can you repeat?
Arterial involvement or the involvement of supramesenteric vein of portal vein.
You can take feedback from the audience. Any question from the participants? Any question? We have discussed the basic outline for. He has given a very good description of the history taking, and he has given a good description of the examination also. And he made some bad observation with the professional diagnosis. You did agree to that, and you should, at PG level, you should be flexible in saying that yes, sir, this diagnosis I like to change. And then we discuss few things about the management of this patient. Any question? Anything you like to clarify? Dr. Acharji, you can unmute and comment. Dr. Acharji. Yeah.
Sir, can you repeat what is abutment, what is encirclage?
Abutment is when the tumor has involved the vessel, any vessel, maybe supramesenteric vein or maybe the artery around that region. That means could be celiac artery, could be common hepatic, could be supramesenteric artery. So when this involvement is less than 180 degree, it is called abutment, and when it is more than 180 degree, then it's called encasement.
Keep in mind, this is not exactly an infiltration. Infiltration is different. Invasion of the tumor into the vessel is different. The abutment means the tumor is overhanging, going around these vascular structures. So this is not a direct infiltration.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
How can we predict preoperatively pancreatic?
Yes,
fistula?
this will discuss in one round scenario. We have discussed earlier day. There are a lot of other things you can have prediction about development of pancreatic fistula for disease you are operating, what disease patient is undergoing the operation. Chronic pancreatitis fistula is less. Short pancreas for peoples is more likely a fistula. Then your technique of anastomosis, blood loss. There are so many things to consider. You will discuss in what round scenario for when you discuss
There are some scoring system.
Yeah.
Pancreatic fistula score.
score.
So
Fistulary score.
there are four predictors of this pancreatic fistula. So according to the scoring, it depends whether fistula can occur or not.
Then what round scenario will take over? Dr. Anandya Chanji.
Professor Shah and Professor Ghosh. Hello.
Yes, yes.
Hello.
Yes, yes.
Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah. We can hear you.
Okay. You have covered almost all the facets of obstructive jaundice, mostly due to pancreatic cancers and peripancreatic carcinomas. I want to press one thing, particularly for the junior doctors, and in a country like ours, poor country like ours, the role of enteric feeding. I mean, for postoperative, in case the patient has a postoperative complication and needs enteric supplementation, I mean nutritional supplementation, the role of a feeding jejunostomy.
Yes. Actually, most of the time you do a feeding jejunostomy, particularly if you feel that there is higher risk of developing pancreatic fistula in this patient. So it's very wise to do a feeding jejunostomy along with Whipple's. Most of the people do a feeding jejunostomy, or sometimes people what they do is they pass the Ryle's tube beyond the GJ. That is another technique. You can do a enteral feeding by passing the Ryle's tube beyond the GJ.
Nasojejunal feeding.
Nasojejunal feeding.
And Professor Ghosh, the retroperitoneal margin is very important, but many junior doctors, in fact, many senior doctors have inadequate idea about what it is. Can you elaborate the idea?
Yes, it's a retroperitoneal margin is the margin which rather hugs the superior mesenteric artery. That area of the pancreas which is in contact with the superior mesenteric artery, that is actually the proximal 2 to 3 centimeter of the superior mesenteric artery, which is in contact with the pancreas. That part is particularly known as retroperitoneal margin. So there are many names for retroperitoneal margin. Sometimes it is called the superior mesenteric margin, retroperitoneal margin, right? So that part is very, very important for histopathological point of view.
Okay, it's 9:40. You say goodbye. We'll meet again on Thursday. Or not Thursday. Thursday is a holiday. So we'll be doing on Friday.
Friday.
Okay. So that class scheduled for Thursday will end